I'm Howard Lovey of the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com, and you're listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. Every episode, I interview an Ally member to find out what inspires them and how they are an inspiration to other authors. My guest this episode is Dale Rogers, an indie author, illustrator, and former assistant professor who retired after 18 years in higher education to focus on his creative work. Based in Nashville, Dale blends poetry, visual storytelling, design, and spirituality in what he calls poetry comics. We talked about his early life, his years as an educator, and what it means to start something new later in life. I'll let Dale Rogers tell his story.
My name is Dale Rogers, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and I am an indie author, an illustrator, and I have a LLC called eDrawing Board, which is currently focusing on poetry comics, which is a genre that I'm experimenting with. In 2023, I retired from an 18-year career as assistant professor of web and interactive multimedia from Nashville State Community College, which is the largest community college here in Middle Tennessee. And so I have a long history of thinking about design and thinking about creation and teaching people how to create scripts and storyboards and turn that into online media. And so when it was time to retire, I thought, well, let me go ahead and take some of this stuff I've been teaching others how to do. And, those that can't do teach, well, let's go do it.
Tell me where you grew up and was reading and writing always part of your life?
Yeah, I think so. I grew up in Miami, Florida. And so I was born in Miami and actually raised in Hialeah, Florida, which is a suburb west, kind of in between Miami and the Everglades. And so I first started off in music. So I was always in choir, was a choir boy from the time I was 5 until I was in my 20s and studied theory and composition. I was a classical guitar major when I first went into college. So I thought I was going to be the next James Taylor, Cat Stevens, that kind of a thing, tell stories. It's all storytelling.
Right.
But I was also really attracted to art. So I was either always drawing or playing music. And so I was usually the last person picked for the sports team. So sports was not going to be in my future, but I really excelled in art and music, and that's where I put my emphasis.
You don't have to explain to me about the pain of being the last to, the last to be picked for in gym class.
Yeah, the guy on crutches was usually picked before I was.
That's right. But you were off there doing creative things, and eventually in college, you wrote your first poem called I Am Man. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, actually, that was really interesting. I was living with a group of people kind of out in the woods. We were all spiritually minded, and we had started a small community of people. This is in Alabama. I was living in Alabama at the time, and a little tiny town called Holly Pond. And so I was going to school at Alabama A&M, which is a land-grant university in Nashville. And so I was a drafting major. I was really this ties into the art. It's very, very precise drawing. So it's not designed to represent emotions. It's designed to create machinery and architecture. So everything is very much to scale and very exact. But it really taught me a lot about line work and all of that. Well, what happened was there was a competition. I just read about it. I was looking for scholarships. I needed something to help me pay through school, and I saw this competition for artwork, and I had been working on something. And so I've always been a fairly introspective person by nature, and I sat down and wrote a poem just about how I just really, feel like I'm one particle in a million particles, just kind of
Hmm.
drifting through life. And what is that like? And what does it feel like? And how does it feel, or what's the experience of that particle being a man? And so I wrote it and I submitted it, and it won first place in the Academy of American Poets competition. I was pretty thrilled.
Reminds me of a song that was popular at that time, Kansas Dust in the Wind.
Yeah, yeah, very much so along those lines. Yeah,
Uh,
I'll have to send you. I don't know if you saw it on my website, but if anybody goes to my website, I have it on there. You feel free to go look at it.
but that gave you confidence as a writer, whereas before you were kind of in general, I guess generally creative, but had you thought of yourself as a writer before that?
Well, I had written songs, and writing lyrics is poetry.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, if, I don't know about you, but growing up in the 70s, it's like a lot of times, even now, I go back and I look at the lyrics and I go, what the hell does that mean? And so a lot of it times poetry is very symbolic, and it's not always it's literal, but it evokes an emotion. And sometimes I would notice that the interplay of guitar and rhythm and melody and harmony, that it's like the music would do part of that emotional expression, but words would do part of it.
Hmm.
And so having written some songs, I knew what rhythm is. I had listened to enough songwriting to where I could feel, I could understand it, and I had studied composition, so I understood the different parts of songs. So I approached poetry as a lyricist that didn't have to follow a strict rule of like AABA or chorus or bridge. I didn't
Yeah,
have to get locked into those structures, and poetry was more open-ended, but there was also some similarities to it as well.
yeah, that's not easy. I tried my hand at songwriting for a book I wrote that came out earlier this year about two musicians, and I tried to get the feeling of music, which is very hard to get in just prose. But I think I managed it okay, and I tried to imagine myself as these characters who are writing songs. Now, eventually, you built a career in multimedia design and education. How did that kind of shape the way you approach storytelling?
Well, it's interesting. I was working for Vanderbilt University at the time, and I was a program assistant. And so I was doing web design and running the database. I was hired under a National Science Foundation grant, but it was a 3-year grant. And I knew that that grant was going to be over. I was already in the second year of that grant, and I knew the third year was going to be here before you know it. But I was already at that time, it was like I was at a fork in the road, and it was going to be, do I become a database administrator? Because I had that technical side to me. I already knew web design and all that kind of stuff. I had taught it to myself. This was back in the late 90s. You couldn't really find college courses in it. You just picked it up and learned it.
Hmm.
And so, or I was going to go into e-learning because I had already been a corporate trainer for a couple of different companies. And I really enjoyed the interaction with people and taking really technical subjects and making it palatable. I had a head for it. I did some tutoring when I was in college too. And I found out that I was able to take technical stuff and make it understandable.
Hmm.
And so I decided that that felt better. Instead of talking to a computer all day, I wanted to talk to people all day. And so that's what I did. So I got my master's in e-learning design. But I looked for a spot at Vanderbilt, and they didn't have anything. I was ahead of the curve. Vanderbilt wasn't doing online training at the time.
Mm.
But I saw an ad in the paper for somebody at Nashville State. And when I went over there, and one of the things that they did was they wanted me to give them a demonstration so that they could see my teaching style. So I taught a room full of educators and deans how to create something with Adobe Flash. And back then it was Macromedia Flash.
Hmm.
And so yeah, so I got that job, but my dean told me, I don't want you as a graphic designer because you know how to work with interactive media. I want you to be over multimedia. So I had to do a deep dive, and I had already played with it, but it wasn't a structured idea. So I did a lot of research
Hmm.
and decided what goes into it and what is the outcome. It's like, when you're writing a book and you know what you want to say, you want to know what's the outcome? What do I want people to walk away with?
Right.
Well, instructional design is exactly the same way. So in instructional design, it's like once people walk out the door, what do I want them to remember? So I focused my attention on what exactly do people need to know, and then I did a deep dive on it, and then I knew if I understood it, I could teach it. And so for me, it was just me understanding it. And that took me down the road of script writing because everything starts with a script. And it's interesting in Nashville, they say everything starts with a song. It all starts with a
Hmm.
song, you know? And so it's the same thing. And so everything starts with a script or an idea, and then you flesh it out, and then your assessments, and then everything in between.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
and so I found that creating courses and writing and scripts and storyboards and creating media were not that different.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, similar to any kind of storytelling. You start with the idea, you start with maybe an ending or a good riff and fill in the blanks. Now you're a little bit of an anomaly in the coding world because you like people.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So then in 2018, you joined Ally after hearing Orna Ross speak at Digital Book World. So why did that moment kind of resonate with you and how did it affect your thinking about publishing?
I noticed that as an educator that I was when you're an educator, you come into the room with a certain expertise and you're going to share that expertise with the people that are in the room. But being an educator, especially in higher education, also requires accreditation. It requires assessments and advising and grading and course development. And and meeting lots of different stakeholders. It's not like, you're kind of the captain of the ship, but you also answer to the sea. And so there's a lot of moving parts in education. And I really wanted to create, and being a creator, being a designer, being a writer, expressing myself is what got me into it in the beginning, but it became so administrative after a while that I started becoming almost jealous of my students because my
Yeah.
students were going to take what I was doing or what I was teaching them and then go out in the world and create stuff. And
Hmm.
I was going to be another semester of teaching basic HTML, you know? And
Yeah.
so I started, so inside of me, the urge to create was calling me. And one of the people on our advisory committee was the head of Digital Book World. And I had oddly enough met him on LinkedIn, but it turns out he lived in my neighborhood. And so we started connecting, and he said, come to Digital Book World. And I said, okay. And I knew that digital books were basically a website in a zip package. I knew enough about it, but I didn't know about it from the publishing business end of it. And so going there, and then I just noticed that, Orna Ross was one of the speakers, and I stayed in the room, and she got up, and as soon as she hit that stage, the entire room erupted in applause.
Mhm.
And I thought, ooh, this is somebody I need to pay attention to.
She's a rock star. She
She's
is.
a rock star.
Yeah.
And I had never heard of her before that. But as she was speaking, and I was really paying attention, and then I learned about the Alliance for Independent Authors. And before I left that table that day, I was already a member.
So, I mean, but before then, you hadn't really thought about producing a digital book or what later became poetry comics. Or was that already brewing in your mind?
I think it was probably already brewing in my mind. That's probably what I was attracted to hear her talk about. It was a seed. It hadn't really sprouted yet. It was just a seed. And so I wanted to look closer at the seed
Hmm.
and see if there was something there. Because I could have gone, I mean, if I was thinking I need to make a change, it could have been going deeper into technology. It could have been going into web design. It could have been a lot of different areas, but something inside of me was saying, I want to express and I want to create. And I had in Nashville, we have a thing called the Nashville Film Festival, and it's actually on the circuit now. We're actually becoming, on the map for that. And they had a panel discussion of some scriptwriters from LA. And one of the things that they said that really caught my attention, even as a multimedia designer, it just says that people are always hungry for content. And
Hmm.
so as soon as what happens on Netflix, when you finish watching a series, you look for the next series. And when you finish reading a book, you look for the next book. And so we're always wanting stories. And that really made a big impression on me. So it's a long way to answer your question, but I think what it was I was getting impressions and ideas from the universe around me saying, hey, look at this, hey, look at this, hey, look at this, hey, look at this. And so all of it was starting to come together. And then when I heard Orna, and she said, you can actually make a career out of this stuff. And then I thought, all
Hmm.
right. Yeah, it's time to take a deep dive now.
Yeah, sounds like you did. I mean, you retired in 2023 and shifted fully into indie publishing.
Yeah.
So tell me about your first books called Sparrow, and you call it a poetry comic. Tell me a little bit about that. Is that a genre you invented or was it pre-existing?
Well, it was new for me. I mean, it's kind of like, in the consciousness circles, we all say we're kind of connected on a unconscious or, on the collective unconscious. So who knows where ideas come from?
Hmm.
And, I've sat around the table with songwriters and said, hey, I've got this idea for a song. And they'll say, oh, yeah, I wrote that 10 years ago. And so, ideas are just kind of floating out there and how they come to us. So to say that I created it is probably a stretch. But to say that it was new for me and it was an idea that I had not heard anywhere else. What got close was Shel Silverstein. So
Yeah.
Shel Silverstein was definitely poetry, but it was also artwork. But I noticed from when I was teaching storyboarding and I was looking at how do you go from script to storyboard, and you have to read through the script and think in your head about what's happening in the script and then make that come alive visually. Well, I thought, I had heard the TED Talk with Scott McCloud, understanding comics, and he talked a lot about comics that, they're more than just superheroes. And so, and you can see that in manga. Manga talks more
Hmm.
about everyday kind of things and more spiritual things. And then American comics, unless you get into like Robert Crumb or some of the other people, they tend to, it tends to be superheroes or sometimes horror or science fiction. And I thought, well, why couldn't the same thing be done with poetry? And so I took my poem and sometimes it just, it starts off with a flash of insight. Sometimes I'm meditating and an idea will come and I pull myself out of the meditation and start writing stuff down. Or it's a quiet time at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm working on one now called 3 a.m. And it's like me having an argument. Why am I waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning? So let's look at that. And then all of a sudden metaphors start coming. Well, I thought, how can I change that and do that? So I took the poem and then I wrote a script around the poem. It's like, in my head, this is what I could see. What if I did this? What if I did that? gosh, that's pretty abstract. How would I show that visually? And I struggle with it sometimes.
Mhm.
But I first scripted it, and then from a script, I said, well, let's every panel is like a shot in a movie. And so let's take each one of those. Let me do for poetry what I've done with other scripting and see if it works. And so Sparrow is a story about a little bird, a sparrow, and its evolving relationship with the wind. And so it's on a branch, strong wind comes by, it's grabbing onto the branch, and it's afraid of it. It doesn't know how to work with it, kind of like like I do with my emotions sometimes when I'm overwhelmed. And so the metaphor is the wind to the sparrow is like my emotions to myself. And so I go back and forth between those to show how there's some similarity between those two. And so how would you depict emotions on a page? You can't, but I can draw a sparrow and I can show the effects of a wind. And so the sparrow and the wind became my metaphor. So I learned a lot about metaphor by creating a poetry comic.
Now, poetry is a kind of a language of the imagination where everybody can picture, I guess, create their own pictures. Does creating a physical drawing, does that limit it? Or is it more of an interplay between the two?
It's a really good question. And, I heard an interview with James Taylor years ago, and somebody asked him if he would explain like fire and rain, or if he would, if people could say what was going through your head when you wrote that. And he said, I'd really rather not do that. And they said, why? And he said, because everybody has their own personal relationship with my songs. And if I tell people what it means to me, it's probably going to deconstruct what it means for them. And I don't want to do that. And so for me, it's kind of like, it's like an adaptation. I mean, Harry Potter started off as a book and then it became a movie. And there's probably, I think there's graphic novels now about Harry Potter. And so who knows if there's going to be songs about Harry Potter in the future. But every single one of those is a different adaptation of an idea or a story. And so to me, the comic is my adaptation of that poem. And other people may do it differently, but this is my adaptation.
Right. One interpretation.
It's one interpretation.
Are there accessibility problems in comics and graphic novels?
Yes, there are. And it's a really huge conversation that's going on right now. I'm a member, I'm an invited expert with the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3, and in the Publishing Maintenance Working Group. And so it used to be the EPUB group, but then after the EPUB standard was after the recommendation was written, that work was done. And so the name of the group shifted so that now we're maintaining it. We're no longer creating it, we're maintaining it. And so a subset of that, there's quite a few people that are actually in that group that are very interested in web comics and are very interested in digital comics. And so we created a task force within that group that focuses on that. And then there's even a subset of that which focuses in on accessibility of digital comics. And so everything in an ebook is basically a web page. And if you have an image on a page, well, that's fine for sighted people. But if somebody is consuming the content of that page and they're not sighted, how are they going to be able to experience that? And as we know, the EU is a bit more strict about content that needs to be accessible. And so accessibility is a very hot topic. But what is accessibility? And that's one of the things. I'm actually writing an article, a LinkedIn series, that I'll be publishing it within the next couple of weeks, talking about exactly this.
Mhm.
Because comics, you have panels, you have narrative boxes, you have dialogue boxes, you have sound effects, you have multiple characters. And even from an accessibility point of view, typically it's like, how does an unsighted person move through the page? And so assistive technologies help people to move through the page so
Right.
that they can consume the content. Well,
Right.
that's really easy. If all you have is a heading level 1 and a heading level 2 and some paragraphs and maybe a figure, and you've got a description of what's in that figure or what's in that chart or what's in that Venn diagram or something like that. But now take that into a comic book. And so, or a manga, you've got panels scattered all over the page, and you've got background textures, and you've got 100 different things happening at one time, and lots of different dialogue. There, from a narrative point of view, there is so much going on that page. How would you turn that into code? You know, how would you describe that in text? It's really difficult.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and so that's what we're talking about. We're talking about to what degree does something need to be accessible, and to what degree do we just need to say, rather than trying to just describe this page, maybe it would just be better if we did either a novelization of this. In my poetry, the poem can stand alone and the comic can stand alone. And I have a script of the poem, which is another aspect of it. So there's text equivalents that people could go through it and get a gist of what it is that I'm trying to communicate and trying to express. But is it going to be the exact same experience as being able to see that comic? Probably not.
Yeah. Interesting. I live in a remote area of northern Michigan. And so I have, something like a 40-minute drive to the nearest big town. So I have my phone read news articles to me while I'm driving. And when it comes to a picture, it'll describe the picture. I don't know if this is AI doing it or if something is built into the news story that allows it to do that, but it helps.
Yeah. And so one of the things that I do is, and I don't want to nerd out too much here, but, so in an ebook, it's an HTML page or XHTML. And within that, there is a tag for an image. And in that tag that tells a computer, hey, this is an image and this is where you can go find it. Then, there's also an what they call it, an alt attribute. And it is an alternate, for people that can't see the image, the computer can take the text inside that little alt attribute and say, well, this is kind of what it is. And so when I looked at that, I thought, oh my God, no wonder publishers are struggling with, how to make digital comics accessible, because there's so much going on this page. What would be the best way to describe it? And so what I did was I just took it to ChatGPT, and I took the panel and, or the page, and I uploaded it to ChatGPT, and I said, describe for me, this is going to go into an alt tag this is going to go into an alt attribute on an image tag. Describe this to me so that it would be accessible. And it took a look at it and what it gave back. And I thought, damn, it did a really good job.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That saves me from having to ask the requisite AI question, because it's not replacing what you're doing, but it's helping you make it more accessible.
Yeah, and it also gives me ideas. So I mean, it'll throw. So I'll say, hey, I just want to see how you would do this. And I mean, I could do the same thing. I could give it to my wife. I say, hey, hon, can you describe what this is? So it really is just getting another set of eyeballs, and this set of eyeballs just happens to be a computer. And so I just say, hey, describe for this. What do you think? And it'll give me something. And then I, as the author, get to go back in and look at what it created and say, it got a lot of it, but it missed a few things. And this is the way I would do it. This is the way I would explain it. And I can go in and I can kind of tweak it a little bit. And sometimes it is so on the nose. It's like, damn, I wouldn't change a thing. That really did a good job.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one last question, and this is a personal one to me too, because I just turned 60 years old. You've spoken about encouraging people to start creating later in life. So what would you say to a retired or late blooming author who thinks it might be too late to begin?
Wow. I hear stories all the time of people that did the bulk of their creation when they were in their 70s and 80s. And so because I'm retired, well, I say semi-retired because you can't live on Social Security. And so, I mean, everybody has to pay the bills. Everybody has to eat and, keep the lights on. And so I just always used to tell my students, if you're going to be up until 2 o'clock in the morning working on something, do something you like. And so I do the same thing. I want to create. And poetry comics are a new genre. When I say poetry comics, a lot of people look at me and there's just like, it's like a dog cocking his head to the side, it's like, what's that? And so there's an educational component for me with people. And sometimes I just have to say, here, look, and I just throw them my phone and I bring up one of my poetry comics and they start flipping through it and they go, oh, I really like this. And so I'm getting great feedback from people. Now, has it turned into has it become a steady source of income? Not yet. And that's the beauty about your podcast and the beauty about listening to Orna Ross and being a member of the Alliance for Independent Authors in general, because I know that I'm not the only one struggling with marketing. I'm not the only one trying to figure out how to get it out there. And so I can listen to other authors struggle with the same things that I am, and I can hear how they're doing it. And it gives me ideas. And it teaches me a lot about who is my audience and who is not my audience. And, what else am I going to do? I don't fish, I'm not a fisherman. I don't play golf. And so all these things that people typically associate with retirement, I don't do that. And one of the reasons why I retired was to create. So I'm going to create. And hopefully that creation, if I just put it out there, like everybody says, create, put it out there, create, put it out there, create, put it out there. And so, yeah, I'm going to continue doing that. And I have the faith and I have the trust that all these people that have come before me that have done this in this way, that if I just keep at it, it'll happen. It's like, what is it, 20 to 50, put out 20 products and that should start, like cranking up your revenue engine. So that's what I'm doing. I'm creating. And then at some point in time, I've gone through the workshop with Orna Ross where, you have the 30 hats. And so right now, mostly what I have is a production hat. Mm-hmm. And I hope to, when I have more products up there and it makes sense to start purchasing ads and stuff like that, I'll go more deeply into my marketing hat. But yeah, I mean, for people that are retiring, I mean, what else are you going to do? Do something you love and put it out there and see what happens. And, keep in touch with me and we'll both figure it out together.
That's right. Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a law that you have to play pickleball after a certain age. I hope not, because
I think that's going to deepen the trauma that I had back when I was in high school about not getting picked for the pickleball couples rounds. I think I'm going to stick to what I'm doing. Thank you very much.
Sounds like a good plan. Well, thank you, Dale. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your life and your career and your philosophy. This has been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. It was lovely chatting with you. And thank you for having me on my show. And thank you for everything that you're doing, because it's listening to you that helps keep the wind under my sails and keeps me going. So thank you for what you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Bye, Dale.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Inspirational Indie Authors. I'm Howard Lovey, Content and Communications Manager at the Alliance of Independent Authors and book editor at howardlovey.com. If you are a member of Ally and would like to be considered for the show, please write to me at howard@allianceindependentauthors.org and tell me what inspires you and how you can inspire other authors. As always, find more author advice, tips, and tools at our Self-Publishing Advice Center, selfpublishingadvice.org. And if you haven't already, we invite you to join our organization and become a self-publishing ally. You can do that at allianceindependentauthors.org.